my cleanliness.
Oh, there's a stack of them for you. That's not, yeah, we're ready. All right, why don't we go ahead and call tonight's Urban Renewal Agency meeting to order? Roll call. All commissioners are present with Commissioner Polling on the phone, with the exception of Jeanette Santiago, who we're expecting momentarily. Yeah. Approval of the agenda for the Urban Renewal Agency.
So moved.
Hearing a motion from Commissioner Grayson, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public comments. Does anyone here tonight would like to comment on anything regarding the Urban Renewal Agency? All right, seeing no one, we'll go ahead and close the public comments. Approval of the minutes from March 7th, 2022.
So moved.
Hearing a motion from Commissioner Lisowski, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner McHugh. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor state by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. District Improvement Grant Programs. Alex Rains.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we have Elaine Howard with us tonight. She's going to complete the presentation that was originally began by Scott at the last meeting. He wasn't able to attend this evening, so she will be taking this over in his place. So Elaine, whenever you're ready, we are ready for you to start.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry Scott could not be here tonight, but I will gladly step in his place. I reread the minutes from the last meeting and know that you had started talking about the new development program and reread the memo that he sent out. So the 4 things that he wanted covered. Did you lose me?
No, you're still there.
Okay, so my computer is thinking it wants to update right now. No. Okay. Okay. Are we still here?
Yes.
Okay, very sorry. I can't see you, but so what is the maximum amount that you want to stipulate on the Colossal program per loan? Number 2, is there a maximum amount for design work? And number 3, how long do you want to give for the completion of a project for the new development program? 1 year is not enough, maybe 2 years with the ability to extend. And then number 4, do you want to be more specific about the types of expenditures for the new development projects? And our advice is to leave that open for you to provide the most flexibility. And then Scott had sent through some potential new guidelines for you to review. And I am trying to figure out on my computer how to see you again. Okay. Anyway, would you like me to walk through the program again, or should we just dive into the 4 questions that Scott has presented?
Yes, please.
Which one? Walking through the all of the guidelines?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So on the new development program, this gets done in different localities, different ways. So in some localities, they just go out for a request for proposals and get developers in and then negotiate with the developers. or you set up a program like this that gives wide parameters for what you want to see in new development and parameters for what kind of support and incentives you might provide. So that is where we have gone with this. So the eligibility for this would be all properties and or businesses located with the urban renewal district are eligible, and only one grant per tenant or property owner or building location will be allowed in any one fiscal year, with the ability to apply again in future years. The purpose is to promote new development in the urban renewal area to eliminate blight, increase the number of jobs, attract new investment and economic activity, and inspire community pride. The maximum grant amount and required match. We haven't identified that maximum grant amount, so that's something to discuss tonight. But all project grants would require a one-to-one match from the property or business owner equaling at least 50% of the total project costs. Again, grant application cycle, you would review grants on a year-round basis until the total grants are funded for that fiscal year. The eligible types of improvement are site preparation, design services, new site development, and new construction. And then the application process is very similar to what Scott went over with you for just the storefront program. So it's fairly simple to get started with, just to make sure there's interest from the agency and city. So it's submitting a letter of interest, meeting with the city agency representation for consultation. Some design assistance may be available. A lot of times that is something that helps you get the product out of the money that you want to get out of it, out of your funding. And then if applicable, the applicant contracts with an architect and or design professional for design assistance and a project cost estimate. And then the applicant will submit an application packet to the city and agency staff for review. So that just has a grant application, a business license if they're a business owner, evidence of ownership of property or authorization from property owner, a project budget, a detailed written description of the proposed project, a statement of their source of funding, and that would include verification of that if it's from a bank or lender showing the amounts of funding that are available. A depiction of the proposed improvements, it can be as simple as a photo with marked revisions or a hand drawing. A material specification board or detailed description of materials and colors, a construction schedule, and then other required information as requested. With that, the city and agency staff would review the application and would have a minimum of 60 days to review it for completeness, schedule and conduct a site visit for the new development grant review committee, and conduct a committee meeting to consider the grant award. The authorization of a funding grant would be determined by conformance with city requirements. They must meet, of course, your city code, your land development code, and other city, state, and federal regulations. Before funding is actually dispersed, land use and building permit approvals for projects requiring building permits, drawings from a licensed architect, the business license if applicable, insurance showing adequate coverage and naming the city agency as additional insured, signing a letter of approval and grant agreement with the City of Scappoose Urban Renewal Agency, and posting some type of sign that the city provides that just shows that that project has received assistance from the Urban Renewal Agency. And then copy of contracts between the business property owner and contractor. And then all contractors are to be licensed, registered, and bonded. The grant period is also another one of our items of consideration. What we're finding right now is a lot of developers and builders are backing out of building commitments because of the inflation rates and because of the rising costs of borrowing money. So we can always put a timeline in here and state that that timeline can be reviewed by the agency and city and extended if needed. And then there is just general conditions about the city may, the award of a grant is subject to available funding and shall be processed on a first come, first served basis. The city and agency may waive any requirement or condition at its discretion. And the grant must be in good order for the improvements for a period of at least 5 years. So those are the basic guidelines. I think until you actually get a proposal, there will be other things to consider. In our working of developing these guidelines, I think Scott had told you before, we've reviewed a lot of other cities' documents and have taken out what we found were the best of those. So these come from, and thank you to the cities of Hillsborough, Sandy, and Astoria for helping to provide information. So if we go back to the number 1, that amount could change over time as you have different money available. So the question is, do you want to identify a maximum amount for your Colosso program per loan, or do you want to leave that more open, and as you put out program guidelines, put in whatever number you put in your budget for that year?
Any thoughts, council?
I'm just wondering what other cities have done.
You know, in Astoria, they have a maximum amount, but they often will waive that requirement if they get an application in. That's something they're very interested in. So they start out with an amount that's bigger, but given a cost of a project, for example, they did I think it's an 8-story building in their downtown. And so their amount compared to the total cost of the project was really low, but it exceeded the maximum amount authority for their program. But they still felt very comfortable because the leverage amount was really high.
Well, their amount was how much?
I believe it's 25,000.
That's what we were discussing on the small program.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, per year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was divided among, maybe 3 or 4 different properties. So
Yeah.
this could be just for one property.
Okay.
Mayor,
Counselor.
City Manager Raines, have we identified what our budget will be for this program as of yet for the next year?
So it does increase a little bit over time, but not a lot. So it was about 24,000 to begin with. I believe this year it's around 29,000. But since no funds have been spent, those do just keep rolling over and accumulating. So we have a couple years of funds that have not been touched. That said, the amount's never huge that we put in there, but further down the line, it does increase by, small increments. So you're not talking about a lot, but if you let it sit there for 3 years, it's not a small amount by any means, especially if you had something specific in mind.
And so Elaine, when we first discussed this with Scott, or the last time we discussed this with Scott, we had identified that flexibility is something that this agency would like to have moving forward. And with knowing that, what would be your recommendation on best identifying? Because my understanding is if we put a $25,000 max on this right now, potentially 5 years from now, we would have to reevaluate that because there would be additional dollars rolling in, maybe a few applicant years. We didn't identify a grant recipient. And so I just want to create the language that gives us the most flexibility so that we're not constantly having to review this, but yet we are we are setting parameters that will not put this agency in a bind moving forward as well, that we don't have enough dollars or the dollar amount that we're maxing out isn't attracting the right applicants. Thank
Right.
you.
Why don't we just tie it to what you establish in your budget? And just say that the maximum amount is the amount established in the agency budget on an annual basis. And that way you can make that determination. And if you get in something for more than that and you decide to amend your budget, then you've amended your budget and that will take care of that.
Seems like I read somewhere that we had 90,000 in there. Is that correct?
I think that was the actual, at one point, I think that was the total that was in there. Like I said, I believe we had money in the budget last year for, the last 1 or 2 years for this program and nothing was spent. So I think for instance, if we let this year ride and didn't actually use it for anything, you'd be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 75, give or take. I need to go back and look at it. But yeah, I think I would agree with you all that, just the maximum amount of flexibility is possible so that when opportunities arise, if it's something that, would be really meaningful to the city, that this is a pot of money that you're able to shift around with little constraint, I think is the best way to go.
My concern about that is that for someone applying for the grant, they don't have a clue. I guess the first step is to meet with the city, so maybe they would get the clue at that meeting. But they might say, well, okay, we've got $100,000 we'll want to spend here, and you match that, so let's move forward. And so I'm just thinking that maybe we need to give them a range or something, so they or maybe they just figure it out. I think the first step was to meet with the city, if I remember correctly, on the
Right.
guidelines. So maybe they'll figure it out at that step there, and they'll be informed that, hey, you're way out of line for that amount of money.
Well, they could meet with us and we could let them know, maybe there was another applicant that got some funds that year. Maybe there's not that much left, or, we could instruct them to check in with us to see the status of, where those funds are for the year.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
And we can add that information on, it says meet with staff, and we can just add a note to that says to verify funding amount available in that fiscal year. And that way, when they review the program guidelines, they know that information will come in that meeting with the staff.
Thank you. That works.
Mr. Mayor. And then from that meeting, let's say you tell them we have 90,000 or whatever. And then they come to us and we're like, not really what we think we want to spend this money on. Yeah.
So you would have the discretion to do that.
Absolutely.
This program's very flexible, and obviously ultimately really comes down to what you want to see the money spent on. So
Thank you.
and it looks like Councilor Santiago has her hand raised.
Jeanette?
Yes, excuse me, I do agree. Sorry about my voice. I'm still getting over a cold. I do agree that if the verbiage doesn't have to be an exact amount, that the flexibility should be a case by case basis. And I agree with Ellen. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jeanette.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Commissioner Lisowski, and maybe this is a different highlight. Maybe this is number 3 on the next one. I don't know. About the tiered approach that you mentioned at the last meeting.
Mhm.
thoughts on that, or?
I don't think that that was in specific, for this particular program.
Right.
It was the other one.
Oh,
And so, this would be kind of more towards maybe one or two projects.
never mind. I'm seeing
Yeah,
that
no,
now.
I understand. I reread those in the
Yep.
earlier context too.
Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like we are kind of leaning towards keeping it open to what the budget is, allows. So the next one would be the maximum amount for design work.
Right,
What's the, what, again, same question that, Mr. McHugh asked, what are the other cities maxing on that design work?
nobody's putting in a maximum amount for design work, so design work may be, design work is often the most where if they do design work and then decide that they can't go ahead with the project, your money is put out there and no construction happens from it.
Oh,
And that's why you might want to say, well, we'll put a certain amount towards that, but what we really want to put our money to is the actual construction. So that is why we wanted to bring that up. And I don't believe that it's specified in the other cities, but we were concerned about that.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Lasowski?
Yeah, I would like to echo that to this, this group as well, is that we should be maximizing the impact of these dollars. And if we do get a project that has to continually go back for design review and we do not identify a cap, if we even choose to contribute any percentage of the actual grant dollars to design, I think that we should be thinking about the dollars and our best use of them. Elaine, with that, in my homework that I had looked at, the industry standard for a project manager for smaller budgeted projects is anywhere between 5 to 15% as the overall budget cost. Is that sound within range from your experience?
It's been a while since I've reviewed costs for project managers, so I'm not sure I can verify that number.
That's fine. I appreciate that honesty.
Oh, we got a developer in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That'd be low, I think.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So project manager / GC. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So standard range is between 10 and 25%. It's gone up during recent times. Usually I would personally like to keep it at 15%. If it gets over 15% on something like this, it's getting excessive, but people are getting more because there's such a lack of people available. But on a decent sized project, let's say a $1 million project, 15% should be adequate. If you could get it for as low as 10, that'd be great. I don't think you're going to find anybody for 5. There's nobody out there. So I also like to throw out a couple other little thoughts on this. If it was me, I would not put any money towards design. If it was me, I wouldn't put any money towards design at all. They have to have skin in the game. And if they don't have skin in the game, how do you know they're even serious? I mean, I've come from a kind of a business conservative philosophy. I probably wouldn't even have this particular program at all because I think it hurts development as much as it helps it. I can tell you a short little anecdote. I attempted a couple months ago to purchase the land across from us here, and I was declined. The reason they gave was they thought they were going to get city money to do their own development. The city could have gotten a building without paying any money to anybody. They didn't want to do that, sell the land, because they thought there was some grant money they could get. I assume it's this grant. I don't really know. This was just passed on to me by the realtor. But you be aware that when you start handing out money, stop development as well as create it. So I would set it up for very limited amounts of money for construction only, because if you don't have skin in the game, how do you know they're serious? Then you end up being bankrolling somebody's speculation. Also, the paperwork seems fairly substantial to make this happen. And if it was me and I was looking for 5 or 10 grand, I wouldn't bother. It's not worth it. So again, if somebody's serious, they're not going to go through, if it's $1 million project, more, they're not going to go jump through a lot of hoops for 5 or 10 grand. I really don't see any reason to be offering money for design phase at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I would add too, just for context, when the city was applying for grants with the Parks and Rec Department with the state, they would only put or allow us to allocate 10% of those dollars received towards any kind of design or engineering. So just as a point too, that I think they have the same thought that they really want you to be, doing as much of that on your own as possible. So not that uncommon.
So yeah, when it comes to design, I kind of lean towards we shouldn't be giving out money for people to speculate. It's, yeah. I think
I think we're all on the same page with that one.
that one's out.
Okay. I think that makes good sense. And in terms of the gentleman's testimony, I find that very interesting, and I think we want to make sure that people understand that the amounts of money you're talking about putting into these programs is small. It's just to help get over a hump or help to incentivize, but certainly not to cause the full development. So if the property owner across the street is thinking you're going to develop that whole property, you're never going to do that. I mean, you know this, but that property owner needs to find out that, yeah,
No kidding.
that this money is really just to try to provide incentive, or maybe to provide some design improvements, that if that property is going ahead and you want something special that's going to help make it look better to the community, that you can help make that happen. But it's certainly not meant for doing any development by yourself. And you know that, but I'm just, I guess, saying that publicly for the gentleman and for anybody else who's listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
For that reason, that's why I would put a dollar cap on it, because otherwise it becomes ambiguous and it creates miscommunication. And one of the basic rules of economics and development is clear, concise information. When it becomes unclear, it becomes a potential problem. So like in this case, they may have misunderstood what the future had for them. They may think they're going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't really know because I haven't talked to them directly. But it did seem curious that at first they were willing to entertain an offer, then they decided that they weren't willing to entertain offers after we made the offer. And I'm not beating up on this particular issue. I'm just, okay, it's fine. I'll move on elsewhere. It's not a big deal. But I would have been happy to have built something there. And now it's not going to happen. And hopefully they'll build something there, because otherwise this program just cost us having a complete downtown. So, and again, I'm assuming it's this program. It's not something else. So I don't have full information on that. But anyhow, thank you.
And hopefully this meeting creates some clarity in understanding the gravity of the program and what it's going to be able to support. So I appreciate the words that you provided tonight, Brian.
So Brian, you're recommending that we actually have a maximum grant amount on the front part instead of leaving it.
We can't hear anything.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because what if you're talking, let's say $50,000 to $100,000 cap, that will help a few projects come over the edge that might not make it. But it's not going to change anybody's mind on a fairly decent sized project. Let's say $1.5 million.
Right.
So if they don't have that information on the front side, what could happen is you could have an owner of property decide that their land's more valuable than it is because of that grant. That grant actually potential for that grant actually becomes part of the value of the land. And so when that value of land is calculated, it's miscalculated, which then causes development not to happen. So I would cap it. If I had to pick a number, it'd be somewhere between 50 and 100 as a max, probably closer to 50, but but it's, you know, it's your city council.
Counselor Miller.
Thank you, Brian. That's a very valuable insight, I think. I think there has to be some middle ground here, though, because it still goes back to the initial concern that we do want flexibility to be able to give the amount that we want to give on certain projects. So I'm wondering if we can accomplish what your concern is, and then also what I think is Councilor McHugh brought up also, by just publishing what our budget is for that rotation or that round in everything that we publish about you know, the application process and everything. I'm just trying to figure out how.
You could potentially do that. Another option would be is to have a standard amount and then put in a footnote that for extraordinary circumstances, more money may be available based on allowable budget resources, because it's going to change every year too, like everybody was saying.
Not to exceed. I mean, we still have an idea of what our maximum is going to be too. So in context of what you said, I don't want people to get the wrong impression that we have more money than what we do too, and then circumvent what you're just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, a law of unintended consequences, where you could actually stop development, not cause it if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I would put it in at 50. I mean, right now you have 50, right?
Something like that. But I also point out too that it was my understanding that these folks were aware the grants were very limited, the funds, and there was only about 25,000 a year allocated. So
That's strange. Again, that's what I was told by the realtor.
right.
I didn't talk to them directly.
Yeah, because they did contact us, and you know, and I the planner had brought that up, and I just mentioned that, you know, sure, you know, that could be worth mentioning, but just to bear in mind that there isn't really a lot.
I'm not mad at the city or anything like that. I just don't want people to think they're helping development if they're not necessarily doing it. And again, I spoke only to the realtor that was involved, not that, but they did seem interested in the offer until they weren't. And then they didn't even counter. They just decided that it was going to work out. But I'm not trying to bang on this particular drum. I'm just saying that any program, be it business, private, public, clear, concise, almost always for economic development, is going to be your best path. But to your point, you want some flexibility. So maybe there's a way to find a middle point.
Yeah, thank you for your point. It's well taken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
My only concern at this point is, well, we figure out a dollar amount, but we don't want the paperwork and the amount of time people have to spend, you know, justifying everything and proving everything and going through it, jumping through all the hoops to be more work than what the money they're gaining. And I can see where that could happen very easily. You know, you get some developer looking at this, you know, you give me 20 grand, and I've got to do all of these things here. This is above and beyond, you know. And so I'm just saying that somewhere there's a balance, and whoever's writing all those guidelines up, you know, to keep that in mind, that don't make it overly excessive. It's easy to add, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And maybe we don't need all those do thises. And maybe we can keep it as simple as possible. So developer can look at that and say, hey, I can do that. That's my thought.
Counselor.
So to Councilor McHugh's point, you know, maybe a way of accomplishing that too is that we scale back at least the initial set of questions, and we review that initial, you know, for things that we need to screen for right away. And then if there are follow-up questions, maybe we need to do that on a case-by-case basis. That might be a way of accomplishing that.
Did I understand correctly that we get about $25,000 a year?
Yes, it does increase slowly over time. It
Over
doesn't
time,
ever get
yes.
right. It's never a huge amount, but it will increase. So this year it's about
Why
29,000.
don't we use that dollar figure?
Well, and it compounds though.
Right. So if it's not used, yes, it would just
Well, yeah.
rolls over and
Wouldn't it just be the maximum possible of the grant would be not to exceed whatever the budget is, or $50,000, say? And then that way it gives a top cap that people will know, or what the budget is. And the Urban Renewal Agency at any time can come back and change that. So if Brian decided to build the Taj Mahal across the street because he bought the property and wanted a larger sum of money, or try to get a grant, he could come to the Urban Renewal and plead and beg and give the good reasons why to do it. So it's, I think that, I like the 50 cap, something in the budget or whatever our budget is. So if we don't have it in the budget because we've given out other awards, then it's just, this is what we have. We're not, yeah.
Elaine, you need timelines from us, correct? Or are we waiving all of that?
Oh, yes, but let me just sum that up.
Sure.
I'm happy to make that one change on the first question. And I just wanted to say that before they meet with you, all they have to do is submit a letter of interest describing their proposed project. So that's really simple. And then they meet with the city and agency to review and discuss that project. So that, it doesn't say what has to be in the letter of interest. You know, it doesn't require them to say really anything. And we can certainly look at the checklist of required information and propose to you things that could be eliminated. So I'd be happy to do that. So yes, you are right. Then we are at the third question, which is the timeline for spending, for actually using the money and completion of project.
I'm actually comfortable with the recommended 2 years with the ability to extend. I don't know anyone else.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Oh, I'm actually, I'm comfortable with the 2-year timeline with the ability to extend. It is written in as maybe the possible. I think that's,
I'm sorry, can you clarify meaning to extend? Are you saying that they
So-
will receive additional funding the second year?
no.
Time.
In the memo, it says, how long do they want to give for completion of a project for the new development program? 1 year is not enough, maybe 2 years with the ability to extend, and that was a question. And to me, that makes sense. It's going to take a little longer, we can extend their time because construction delays happen.
I'm in full support of the 24-month period with an opportunity to review for extension as needed, but I would ask, do we need to write that in as a parameter within the context of the application process? And do we need to be as specific as possible of what that review request would look like and what parameters we would want them to provide as into why we're looking at the review?
I'm not
Explanation of review.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you need to do that right now. That would be something, you know, if once you get somebody in and you've got somebody in line and you want to go ahead and do this, that could be something you could develop later. We can certainly propose something now, but I'm not sure that that has to be done now to be able to get your program up and running.
And I have no problem waiting, but I do want it to be an agenda item for us to address as we move forward so that we're more proactive in the approach rather than reactive. Thank you.
Sure.
Mayor?
Jeanette? Councilor
Well,
Santiago?
I've been, yes, sorry. I've been in the I've kind of been in this conversation later in the, and just wanted to clarify a couple of things. It seems like a lot of the conversations into smaller projects, but when you're talking about site preparation and design services and new construction, those are big dollar amounts. Maybe when the wording of the projects should be maybe smaller projects if you want to limit the amount of grants per applicant. Another thing is that I was thinking is if you do extend the extension, say 2 years, does the applicant, and depending, I guess, on a case by case basis, would the applicant be eligible to apply for the second year in additional fundings in order to finish the second year project? I'm just bringing up these questions in case it hasn't been addressed. So yeah, I'm just, and I think that we should kind of see on a case by case basis, and if we were the types of projects that we're looking at that are realistically on the $25,000 range, then I don't think there'll be a problem of the issue what Brian was bringing up. That's just my thoughts, but yeah.
Thank you, Counselor. Elaine, do you have any comments on?
No, I think what we had proposed is that if somebody got funding one year, they could not apply for it the next year, additional funding. This, you know, if it was the project went 2 years and then they decided they wanted to apply, I mean, they could apply. You could tell them, no, you've already gotten it and we have other stuff going on. But the way it's written now, if it's 2 years since their original funding, they could apply for more, but you have the ultimate ability to say no.
Yeah, I think it's one project, one grant. I don't think that once you start a project, you should be able to come back and just get more and more grant money. Go ahead.
I would question though, if we have a developer and they want to do, like, project ends and is completed, maybe they want to do an addition to the property, and it would be a great enhancement for the area. Would we say no because you've already utilized the grant program? I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. I just looking at it from both sides to better understand how those dollars can be spread. I am more of seeing the dollars get spread amongst multiple projects rather than just going into one specific property.
Mr. Mayor.
Counselor.
I would say that as a city, we've reapplied for different grants with a different scope every time. I'm open to accepting applications from people that have already applied in the past.
Well, I didn't say apply project based. So
Yes,
if someone who does one project, they can't come back the next year and get more money for that same project.
I'm hearing you. I'm also talking about what.
Okay.
South.
Why do we put that restriction on there? Maybe they have a reason for doing it and it benefits the city.
Commissioner Grayson, I thought you were.
Go ahead.
I just said I was
Sorry.
commenting. Yes, thank you. Sometimes people get deep into a project and they feel like, oh, this other opportunity opened up. I could do this while I'm already here. I think that would be a separate project application. It's not necessarily adding on to the one they've already. So I'm open to different scopes of projects coming in by the same applicant.
Could also note too that you'd prioritize new projects, but that you'd be open to considering applicants that would be coming in on the same project depending on the circumstances. But you could build in some flexibility for yourself that they just may not be at the top of the pile, so to speak, if you had other people that were new.
Brian.
Brian Rosenthal again. I have a thought for you guys. So when you start a major project, you're not going to change it unless something extraordinary happens, because it's all going to be incredibly expensive. You get your best deals from your contractors, and if you change anything, it's change orders, and they're brutal. So a good project is a project that comes online on budget. But what can happen is you can build a building and not have tenant improvements. So what could happen is that they build a building like one of mine, where you could put a variety of businesses in there. And then you could have a tenant come along and let's say the city's excited about whatever they want to provide. But maybe the answer would be is you have one for the general contractor, then make it available to potential tenants if there's something that's appropriate within your program. Because I really don't think you're going to see a lot of people wanting to change substantially once they start, because they're not going to want to change substantially once they start, because if they do, the costs are going to be cost prohibitive. It's just too hard. It's like, think of it like an oil tanker. It starts going in a certain direction and it just keeps going that way. If you try to change direction, it's very, very difficult. So I think that realistically, for most people doing development, you're going to see that they're not going to be very wanting to do changes in the middle of a project of any significance. It will only be to deal with adversity, like they find something they didn't know about the property, or that kind of thing. But there is an issue of tenant improvements, which could be separate from that.
Thank you, Ryan.
Mr. Mayor, and I think that's why we're clarifying that these are separate projects. It's not the change of
Yeah.
one that's already been.
I'm just watching here, but it looks like I'm watching the NFL try to figure out the rules committee. I think keep it very simple. Hey, if they applied and you don't want to give it to them, tell them no. I mean, I'm just watching from these little changes, make a note here or a side note here, say this, but then there's a sub note. You guys have said from the beginning, you want people to be in this program. You want to make it simple, and you guys always have the right to tell them, hey, I'm going to give you this much, and that's all there is to it. You can tell them, sorry, you applied, but we can't give it to you. That's just my opinion. Keep it simple from the outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
I sense that as well, but my concern also is, let's say tomorrow 3 counselors don't want to be counselors anymore, and we have to make sure that this language is very clear for whoever sits in our seat next. So thank you for that empathy. I'm good.
Mayor?
So did we get on the final part of it, the timeline?
Yes, I think we said 2 years with the ability to extend, and we will talk about specificity on, that ability to extend at some point to review that, but that may not have to be done to get your program up and going, started. You've got at least 2 years to figure that out, because you get an applicant in and it goes 2 years before you have to extend. So that language shouldn't stop you from going ahead. So we just have the one last question, which was, and it's the information that you've gotten from the folks in the audience kind of helps us think about this. It's, do you want to be more specific about the types of expenditures for the new development projects? And our advice is to leave that open to you to provide the most flexibility. So a developer will come into you and say, I'd like X amount of money and I'd like to use that towards X. And then you can review that and determine whether that works for you, instead of saying, well, you can use it on windows and you can use it on furnaces. And so we suggest that you aren't specific about that, but certainly can write it differently if you want.
I'm in favor of keeping it open.
Yeah, me too.
I do have one question. Where are we on number 1? I got lost somewhere. What are we doing on 1?
I
My
believe-
notes
Oh, go
were to, it was as allowed by the budget or 50,000.
Say that again.
So either what's allowed or actually in budget and available, or 50,000 as a cap,
Okay.
regardless of what's in.
We will have a dollar figure in there.
Correct. So there is a cap, but it's still flexible.
Thank you.
Point.
All right, anything else?
Good. Thanks, Elaine.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Osowski.
Elaine, do we also need to identify the time period for the criteria of non-performance after the dollars have been identified for the award?
Probably.
And would it be, in your experience, standard practice that if it's not within the 24-month period that we had identified, that it would, and or with consent of review of extension beyond that period, we would no longer provide any additional funds to the project, correct?
Correct. That's very logical.
I have one more question.
Good.
We have a committee on here, that the new development grant review committee. Is that us?
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun,
So, okay.
Congratulations. Add it to your LinkedIn profile.
Go to your closet and pull out a different hat for that one.
There you go.
Switch hats after
I
that.
always wanted to be in that committee.
All right, so I think we've come to the conclusion of the 4 questions. Is there anything on the agenda? We do have some discussion on the smaller grant programs, or was that just, we don't
No,
have a
you
lot of
had
time?
given us- you had given us specific direction. There were only a couple of points that needed changed. And when I looked at the materials, I saw that Scott didn't send that back to you, and I think it was because it was pretty clear and tied up. And I think as we send this back for you to review, we'll send that back. And that one should be close to final because we did agree on a couple of specific changes to it. So,
We'll make sure that everything comes back to you for a final once
Yeah.
over. But yes, I think at this point we've worked our way through these, draft programs, and we can come back with something finished for you to look at.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Elaine.
yes, thank you. It was great. Take care of
Seeing
you.
anything else for the Urban Renewal Agency meeting? Seeing nothing, meeting adjourned.